You fail to understand, and the same incredible terror that's menacing me will strike at you!
Hey guys, welcome back to Scientology, The Big Lie with Mitch Brisker. I'm Mitch Brisker. I don't know if there's actually anybody here yet, but that's okay with me. I'm happy to just be talking at my camera. I got to send my kid a text. Oh, you don't need to know that. I am alive. Okay, great. So tonight we're going to read another chapter from Scientology, The Big Lie. This chapter is chapter 13. It's titled A Scientific Basis for Hate. It's basically focuses on the tone scale, which a lot of you may be familiar with. I think people are still watching the Emmys because they're still going on for a couple of minutes. So here, let me just rehearse doing some housekeeping. So if you, let me see here, if you would like to help me support my journey to hold Scientology accountable, you can do so by buying me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Mitch Brisker. You can also buy lovely copies of my book. This is the Amazon hardback, but you can get the actual the bookstore hardback with the dust jacket and all that. They're available on my apps, my merch store. Sorry guys, I'm a little scattered. I've been packing up my house to move, which is a whole bunch of excitement. And if you're new to the channel and you haven't subscribed, thank you very much. If you choose to do so, hit the notification bell and give me a like if you like the content. And a couple people are here. Oh, Catherine Olson. Hey, Catherine, thanks for dropping by. Might just be you and me. No, I know they're just going to come flooding in as soon as the Emmys are over. Okay, here they come. There's BOC Buddy. Hey, nice to see you. Thanks for showing up. And let me see, what kind of news do I have? Well, I'm moving, but that doesn't really concern you. There might be a little bit of interruption in my streaming and so forth, but I'm intending to do a lot more streaming with. Hold on, let me just do something here. I got to take this off of here. It's kind of annoying. Okay, and oh, one more. If it would be really appreciated, you can support this channel directly by my PayPal is mitchbrisker@gmail.com, and or you could just stuff a bunch of hundreds in an envelope and just reach out to me. I'll give you a mailing address to send it to. So let me see what else. So yeah, I'm going to do that, but I'm going to be doing. I'm planning on doing more streaming from outdoors, like all law protesters. I've done a couple of streams with Tori that went very well. Tori is, she's become a dear friend, and we're the same generation and have a lot of things to talk about in Scientology. And so we're going to be doing a lot more of that. And I have some upcoming stuff organized, which brings me to the next little piece of housekeeping is that on my link tree on my channel page, there's an Amazon wish list. There's a number of things that are kind of expensive. I'm trying to upgrade my equipment. It's all specifically for the channel. One of the probably the least expensive, but one of the most important things on there is wireless mics, so that when I'm out there working with Tori or interviewing people on the street or doing protesting on the street, then I have, we don't have that problem with the sound dropping off, and I don't have to hold a mic into somebody's face. It's a nice little wireless mic you can pin on somebody and get good sound. So yeah, we're going to be returning to Big Blue to make our presence known there. I don't even consider it protesting as much as I do being annoyingly in their space, she and I talking about our experience of Scientology, sitting in front of the Scientology building. But there's other places I want to do that. Some are extremely, I think, important, and they're sort of been untapped. So there's that. So if anybody, you can always just leave whatever you want as an Amazon gift card, and then I'll use it towards the mics. Because when I move, I'm not going to have this little studio for a little bit. So I'm probably going to be streaming from a gas station restroom on my phone, or maybe on the street with Tori. Probably on the street with Tori. But anyway, so anyway, without further ado, I'm going to get into this chapter. This is an interesting one. You know, one of the things that I tried to do when I wrote this book is because I was puzzling my way through this stuff for my own kind of peace of mind in terms of putting reconstructing what I believed in. And one of the more interesting foundational components of Scientology is called the emotional tone scale. A lot of you have heard about it. Those of you that are in Scientology, you absolutely know all about it. And it to Scientologists, this tone scale, I don't have a picture of it, unfortunately. I didn't pull one up, but it's top to bottom. I describe it pretty thoroughly in the book, but it has this kind of sense of science. Like Hubbard made this preposterous claim that human emotions are on a spectrum like wavelengths, like all energy in the physical universe, scientific fact, is expressed as wavelengths, presents itself as wavelengths. You have light, which is at one far end of the spectrum of wavelengths, and you have visible light. You have infrared on one end and ultraviolet on the other end, and then you get into heavier kinds of waves, so you get into sound waves and so forth. There's all kinds of energy waves in the universe. So Hubbard said, well, emotions. He made this kind of I don't know what you would call it. It's kind of it's a scientific claim, and that all Scientologists accept as scientific fact, which is that human emotions exist on like a spectral scale, and on the tone scale, the numbers that you hear, like it's very common. People will talk about it. Somebody is at 1.1, such as homosexuals. They're depraved and degraded, and their emotional tone is 1.1. That 1.1 actually represents a wavelength. The same idea that if you were looking at like the visible light spectrum, or just the spectrum in general, the light spectrum, there would be numbers on it expressing wavelengths. So he tried to make this thing look really sciencey, but it's literally a bunch of crap. And in my book, I referred to it as the scientific basis for hate. So this is chapter 13, and I'm going to just begin it now. I grew up in what might be referred to as a progressive household that stood against bigotry in any form. By the time I encountered Hubbard's extreme bias against homosexuality, I was deep into the Scientology mind trap with its promise of self-improvement, wrapped in an invitation to help build a new and better civilization. I'd become accustomed to rationalizing Hubbard's views on homosexuality as being a product of the 1950s anti-gay sentiment that permeated the culture back when he wrote his seminal work on Dianetics and Scientology. Within the narrow confines of cognitive dissonance, I thought to myself that if he were alive today, or were to come back in the future, something Scientologists believe will happen, he would certainly revise his thinking on homosexuals, right? That's how I justified his proclamation that homosexuality was a perversion, that all homosexuals should be dispatched without pity. That's a quote. And that homosexuality could be cured with auditing. It was just something he forgot to revise before he departed his body. But the fact is, he was virulently homophobic and spread that hatred to his followers. While you could take Hubbard's words as an abstraction, the manner in which they were echoed by my fellow Scientologists, especially Sea Org workers, was very real. In Scientology, oh, sorry, I lost my place. I got distracted. Okay, so in Scientology, the bias against non-heterosexuals was rooted in Hubbard's scientific discoveries, as described in his writings and lectures on the subject. He calls the emotional tone scale, a numeric scale delineating all the emotional states human beings are capable of exhibiting, extending from total failure at -40 at the bottom of the scale to serenity of beingness at plus 40 on the top of the scale. According, serenity of beingness would be kind of sort of a beatific state. I don't know if you know that, what to be beatified. It's like a saintly like state. Like if you look at the face of Michelangelo's The Virgin Mary, she just has this very serene kind of loving expression. That would be serenity of beingness. According to Hubbard, okay, 1 point fun on the okay. See you, Bill. How you doing? Okay, we're gonna move on. Let me know if my sound's not great. I think I'm on the right mic. I'm gonna stop and double check real quick just to make sure, because that keeps happening. Yeah, we're good. Okay, good. So let's move on here. So according to Hubbard, a person's position on the tone scale determines their survival potential in life. This is really important. This is why the whole rationale behind the supposed rationale behind Dianetics is that it will raise you on the tone scale. It will raise your emotional tone, and as it does, it raises your survival potential. And these sicknesses you have, like homosexuality or whatever, they'll drop away because they're just a function of your emotional tone. And this truly is believed. I believed it. It's believed like science. Like this is Scientology science. So here we go. The higher one is on the tone scale, the better one survives. As one descends the tone scale, their survival potential lessens. Homosexuals are said to occupy the emotional tone of covert hostility at 1.1 on the scale, commonly referred to as 1-1. Scientology auditing is said to raise one's tone level, and in doing so, afflictions like homosexuality naturally fall away. In their fervent criticism of psychiatry, Scientologists are quick to condemn the psychiatric practice of labeling people based on a diagnosis. Yet Scientology's practice of assigning labels based on a person's perceived position on the tone scale is no different than using psychiatric labels such as psychotic or bipolar or, my crazy ex-girlfriend who was borderline or whatever it is, simply because you want to stigmatize someone's behavior. Yeah, so think about it. Yeah, sure, maybe there's some psychiatrists maybe go overboard in labeling people, but Scientology is a whole goddamn scale. I believe there's 52. I've shot them all on film twice for the tone scale film. I think it's 52. Hey, degraded daughter. Hey, thanks for stopping by. If somebody remembers the number of tones, I think it's 52. I bet you Catherine will remember. So anyway, it's like they have this entire catalog of labels, and some of them are really, the most popular one, the two most popular ones are antagonism. Oh, and they abbreviate it because they love to abbreviate everything. They abbreviate to antago. Oh, that person's so antago. Out in the secular world, we might say aggro, but there they use the emotional tone. And then, of course, the other most popular one is 1.1 or 1-1 on somebody who's 1-1. And you don't have to be gay to be 1-1 in Scientology. You can just be like a backstabbing, kind of a person, which, what do we call that? He borrowed the concept from the mental health field, passive aggressive. If you're familiar with that term, that's something that Hubbard stole and used the phrase 1.1 and then said that all homosexuals are 1.1, but it's the same as being passive aggressive. Saying something like, wow, you've lost a lot of weight. You look pretty good in that dress. It's not really a compliment, right? I've seen that dress 4 times this week. Well, it looks pretty good on you, though. It's that sort of, that sort of passive aggressive behavior. So here we go. Probably because of my position in the organization, I never got in any trouble for voicing my disagreement with Hubbard's views on homosexuality, which I did a lot. When a staff member made a derogatory remark about someone's sexual orientation, I often challenged them to explain why they thought homosexuality was an aberration. An aberration is defined in Scientology as a deviation from the norm, which would be what you expect. But there's no clear logic in that, because there's been, in the animal kingdom, including humans and apparently 10,000 other species, as long as we've been around, we've been aware of the fact that in the animal, in whatever living kingdom, you expect there to be same-sex pairing. So by their definition, it means it's not aberrated, because it's what you expect to find. If you found no same-sex pairing of any species, that would be an aberration, because it's absolutely going to happen. So anyway, but I'm getting so when a staff member made a derogatory remark about someone's sexual orientation, I often challenged them to explain why they thought homosexuality was an aberration. Their responses were often humorously illogical, because LRH said so. Or the tired argument that if everyone were gay, the race would cease to procreate and so become extinct. Whoever thought that never read about the baby factories in Huxley's Brave New World. But in all seriousness, that argument falls apart by pointing out that if everyone joined the Sea Org, the race would also cease to procreate, as Sea Org members are forbidden to have children. According to their logic, in terms of procreation, there was no difference between being in the Sea Org and being gay. So yeah, I didn't win a lot of friends using that argument when I worked with the Sea Org, but it shut them up really quickly. They hated hearing, in terms of anything, being in the Sea Org is the same as being gay. They didn't like that. Okay, so here we go. Assuming that gays couldn't procreate. Yeah, but there's so many ways to have kids. It's like ridiculous. I mean, it's not ridiculous, but it's certainly not limited to heterosexual pairings. So here we go. So one staff member with whom I worked closely for years paraphrased a Hubbard quote that said, homosexuals are covertly hostile because they trick us in. Oh, this is insane. They trick us into thinking they are one gender when they're actually behaving as the opposite gender. You see a man, apparently this person is now, I'm quoting this person who says that they're quoting Hubbard. I never heard this quote from Hubbard, but doesn't matter. The quote is, you see a man and you expect him to be into manly things, and the opposite turns out to be true. In all fairness, she was paraphrasing. I never heard the lecture myself. Regardless of whether Hubbard said this, it was what she believed to be true, and is typical of how Scientologists in general, and Sea Org members specifically, view homosexuality. Ultimately, Hubbard's view of homosexuality is no different than that of other fundamentalist religions. Homosexuality is a sin against God, curable by adhering to one's faith. Conversion therapy, as practiced by numerous Christian denominations, relies on prayer as a mechanism for reprogramming an individual's sexual orientation, while in Scientology, as the individual's emotional tone level rises up the scale as a result of receiving auditing, they naturally become heterosexual, so they believe. Both beliefs are based on the same magical thinking that through some form of mental activity, homosexuality can be cured, not to mention being based on the bigoted view that homosexuality falls outside the spectrum of normal human behavior and should be cured. Hubbard's technology is in strict accordance with his teachings. At the core of Scientology is the belief that only through applying Hubbard's technology in strict accordance with his teachings can one achieve spiritual awareness. And that technology must remain pure and never altered. There is no evolving with the times, no adjusting to shifts in cultural norms, no room to grow or evolve. That chiseled in stone mentality includes Scientology's basis for its bigotry against the LGBTQI plus community. It's a tongue twister. Anyway, that's the chapter. Yeah, so CEO Bill makes us, thank you very much. So yeah, CEO Bill makes a comment here. He says, well, it's not gay if I'm just identifying with my past life in a lady meat body. Yeah, that's a little bit of an inside Scientology joke, but yeah, I totally get it. You're right. There's a lecture somewhere where Hubbard says, it's no wonder with all the times you've been a man or a woman or a man, it's no wonder people are confused about their sexuality. So it's like, why is he then making this point about homosexuality as an aberration if he himself has admitted in his lectures? Oh, but wait, we're talking about Hubbard and Scientology, which is just an endless pit of hypocrisy. So anyway, so that's what I had to say about the tone scale in my book. There's obviously a lot more to it. And so if you have any questions, now is a good time to do it. I was anyway, because I was breathlessly packing all day, so I didn't really have a chance to focus on the stream. I just knew that I wanted to do this one. Yeah, so I personally think there's quite a few people who are LGBT. Well, I like if you're or who are closeted, and because of the way Scientology can destroy your own ability to be aware of your own self identity, don't even know that they're gay. I mean, I definitely know some people that were born into the Sea Org that I worked with, and I'm just like, they're gay. They just, they just whatever. And you can see it sort of coming out in frustration, in their kind of the way they deal with people and so forth, and so anyway, that's the deal. So questions? Anybody got questions? Oh, one thing I want to bring up, I'm going to say it again for those of you who just arrived. I'm trying to upgrade some equipment. I have an Amazon wish list. The most important thing on it are wireless mics. So because I'm planning on doing a lot more streaming outdoors, more stuff with Tori Magoo and doing at some Scientology sites that nobody has visited in Hollywood that kind of need to be brought into attention, people's attention. But other than that, look what I found. I'm going to be. Let me see if I can. I found this. Okay. These are 3 copies of Freedom Magazine. I had a bunch of them, but I don't know. I threw them out. I threw a bunch of stuff out, and I've been meaning to do this for a while. I've scanned some internal pages of these. I hear freedom mentioned in the ex-Scientology space on YouTube, but I never really hear people talk about it. Hold on. We'll get back to that. I want to put up this comment, this question by CO Bill. Do you think Elrich may have keyed in something, meaning got triggered into something unfortunate that happened in his youth? Very likely. I mean, I wouldn't doubt it. He was in the Boy Scouts. I'm sorry about that. That's like, I mean, being in the Boy Scouts is. I hope I'm not offending anybody in the Boy Scouts, but it's almost like being like a, what are they in the Catholic Church, like being a choir boy or whatever. It's like there's been a lot of essay of young boys, so that's very likely true. I do know that a person that I worked with who was not a bad person, but they were hopelessly brainwashed into Scientology, and so they expressed that anti-gay sentiment, would make gay jokes. And so I basically, the first time he did it, I looked at him and I say, if I didn't know you better, I would think, hearing you talk like that you were like molested by a scoutmaster when you were a kid. Because why else would you be making jokes like that? Anyway, that shut him up for a while. And then I just flat out said, look, I don't want to hear it. It's not right. Believe what you want, but you don't have to ridicule people that way. But I wouldn't doubt it. I never thought about that. But just the fact that he was like so into the Boy Scouts was like, and there is a lot of that. I mean, I know today they've cleaned it up, but like, let's face it, it's just one of those things. Okay, so let's get back to this Freedom Magazine thing. Okay, so I don't want to spill too much of this because I've kind of reserved a stream for it, but let's get into it a little bit now. So a lot of people, and I know you guys, that might be everybody in the stream, was already came out of Scientology. So it's going to be a little redundant for you, but they have what's called in Scientology, we often refer to them as the front groups, which are applied scholastics, Narconon, Criminon, the Volunteer Ministers, the Way to Happiness Foundation, Youth for Human Rights. And these things in Scientology, they're referred to as the social betterment campaigns, or for short, because, in the acronym obsessed world of Scientology, everything has to be shortened down. I mean, literally, like I know people whose names were one letter. Oh, like there's a guy I worked with named Henning. Some of you may know him. I'll talk about him someday. He was to the design of things what I was to the film of things, but the filming of things. But anyway, he was H. He was like, oh, go see H. It was like, if you could take it down to one letter, they would. But anyway, so they had the social betterment campaigns, and they referred to them as the SBCs. So keep in mind what I'm talking about. I'm just going to call them, instead of front groups, because they're the SBCs. So, but I've never heard anybody talk about. Okay, CEO Bill, now you're going to make me mention it. No, this was a gold person who's at SMP, Scientology Media Production Today. No, the person I'm speaking of is not that person. But this guy was H because his last name was not an H, but I'll tell you later. Hi, Al. Hey, so this is Bridge 1872. Thanks for stopping by. I really appreciate you being here. No, you don't have, hey, CO Bill, if you don't have to apologize, it's totally fine. I'm happy to get your guess. I don't know who Henny Held is. I think I've heard that name. So anyway, we have the SBCs, the front groups, the social betterment campaigns, the SBCs. Okay, we all know about this. And occasionally you hear about Freedom Magazine. It'll get mentioned. And I don't want to go into the interiors of these today. But where do these SBCs come from? Well, the first one that originated, I might be off on my history a little bit. I'm sure there's somebody out there. Oh, great. Thank you guys so much. This is, you're filling my heart with love. Ryan M says, it's amazing that almost everyone watching this given video has given this video a thumbs up. Good work, Mitch. Thank you. No, good work, you guys. You're very appreciated. So where do they come from? So back in the days of the Guardian's office, one of the things that they did, I'm sure at the behest of Hubbard, was they started this exporting his study technology, what they call study tech, right? And we can talk about study tech some other time, because there's actually some things in study tech that can help you to learn to study. The problem with it is, okay, here's an example. The misunderstood word, big thing in Scientology. You're not supposed to read past a word without understanding the definition of that word. And there's a very precise technique to how you look up a word. And you get so good at this, you can flip open a dictionary and like within one or two flips of the pages, you are on that word. And it's helpful when you're studying to have that skill. The problem is if you study Scientology and you go past a word you don't understand, you're a criminal. That's like a high crime. Not a high crime. That's a misdemeanor. I don't know. Maybe Catherine remembers. I don't know. But you get all kinds of ethics trouble. Like if it comes like you were studying past a word you didn't understand. So it's not like the indoctrination into using dictionaries and clearing words is bad. It's not. I remember I was on a train once going to San Diego, and I was reading a novel, and I had a pocketbook dictionary, and I kept looking up words every time I came to a word I didn't understand, or was a little uncertain of, or was used in a new context. This woman, very smartly dressed businesswoman sitting next to me, she said, wow, you're actually reading a novel and looking up words in a dictionary? That's amazing. That's great. She was really impressed. So it's not a bad thing. It's just the way that it's weaponized to turn you into a criminal if you don't comply. Like you are literally become afraid to study for, you're under all the stress, like, oh my God. And then you have all these ways, or you're made to prove that you know what words mean, and it's crazy. So if you were subjected to this Scientology and you left, by all means, keep the skill of looking up and understanding words. It's great. So yeah, anyway, getting back to this. So I think it was when the Apollo, the ship, the fake Navy ship, this first Sea Org vessel, or not first Sea Org, but the first big ship, was in the Mediterranean. I think they were in Morocco. And the reason I think this is there's a film about study tech, and Hubbard wrote the scenario about there was some telecom in Morocco, and Hubbard was like auditing the king or something, or the king was receiving Scientology. And so they made this deal with them to send auditors and word clearers into the telecom to help the company. And it was like a goodwill thing. And I think I always assume, and plus from things that I heard and read, that in that period in Morocco, which was, when they also got, I think it was in Tangiers, maybe. I'll have to ask Jana, she would know. When they were accused of being a CIA ship, and people were throwing rocks at them, and throwing their vehicles off the dock, that the Guardian's office got kind of busy trying to safe point, make it safe for the ship by offering them this, golden study technology. And out of that grew the front group, the SBC of Applied Scholastics, which tries to get this stuff into schools and so forth. And then the other, so all of these social betterment campaigns, they came out of OSA because, the Guardian's office became OSA. But even though they're all under the banner of what's called ABLE, the Association for Better Living Education through Education, which is a separate organization from OSA by a long shot, they originally were like PR capers put up by the Guardian's office and later by OSA to make Scientology look good. So the tip of the spear of getting of softening up the ground to make it safe to push this stuff into society is Freedom Magazine. I mean, this is the unspoken front group of Scientology. Now, if you open this thing up and you look at the masthead, it says Freedom Magazine, investigative reporting in the public interest, published by the Church of Scientology International, right? And they list two offices, one on Hollywood Boulevard and one in Washington, D.C., because this is the stuff that's going to the legislature. This is the propaganda, right? And goes to Washington, D.C., goes to community leaders, goes to whoever, schools, whoever is interested in hearing about this kind of stuff. Hey, OGB Foster, thanks for coming by. So anyway, and I guess I'll spill the beans on this now. I mean, this is going to blow your mind. So, and basically they relied on professional journalists. They would hire these really high-end top journalists with all kinds of credibility and track records and resumes, and they'd give them these assignments, and they'd go out and they'd say, like, here's a cover story. Created equal. Out of Ferguson's anger, solutions emerge. So when they had the riots in Ferguson, one of their journalists goes and writes a really legitimate story about this, and they put it in this magazine, and they put some Scientology ads in here, and they say, okay, this is the one that made my head explode completely. Okay, check this out. Let me see if I could find, I got to find that first. I didn't want to get into this too much, but there's a lot more to go into. So they got all these articles in here, and one of the people that, because, Scientology is really good at love bombing people, like keeping them away from knowing all the bad stuff and convincing them that they really do exist for the public good. This is an article on a woman called, her name is Marian Wright Edelman. And she is, I kid you not, I'll put this up when I do the stream because this is just a preview. She is, can you read this? She is a children's rights activist. So here is this organization that abuses children, that traffics children, that separates children from their families, that just does not care about their childhood. And they're pushing in this magazine, they're platforming this woman who is a legitimate children's rights advocate, and she's been tricked into supporting this. Now, I am happy to say that their spoiler alert, they haven't been able to issue a copy of Freedom Magazine since 2019. And the reason is all the journalists quit because they hate David Miscavige. There were 5 high-end journalists writing really, I mean, some of these articles, they're like about religious freedom, and they did one, I don't have it, but they did one on the drought in California. And to give you an example of the legitimacy that it had back in the 90s is that there is, I don't know if any of you listen to Amy Goodman on Democracy Now! She has a channel on YouTube. She broadcasts on Pacifica Radio. It's a very progressive station. And she had editors from Freedom Magazine on twice to talk about some of these articles, not anything about Scientology or any of the SBCs, but to just talk about, the stuff that Scientologists are reporting on, right? Pretending to be whistleblowers, pretending to be advocates against human trafficking, for the rights of children, and all this stuff. And Amy Goodman, who I have a tremendous respect for her, that's one of my major news sources. I'll put a link in the show notes afterwards. They do some very good reporting, and it's not corporate news. It's not MSNBC. It's not Fox. It's like none of that crap. It's and if you think NPR is maybe too deep into the pockets of corporations, Pacifica Radio is not. So Amy Goodman, it brings on an editor from Freedom Magazine saying, this is Freedom Magazine. They're noted for doing their public service work, and they're whistleblowing, and they're sponsored by the Church of Scientology, just like that. Like, she had no idea. I don't think Amy Goodman would do that now. That was back in the 90s. So yeah, that's the deal with Freedom. So I'm going to go through some of these articles in a future stream, hopefully within the next couple of days, and talk about this because, you can hear it mentioned. I mean, most recently I heard it mentioned in relation to Emily Armstrong, because Emily's mother, Gail Armstrong, was a past editor of Freedom Magazine. I knew Gail very well. I considered her a friend when I worked for Scientology. She is very smart. I just want to say, I kind of want to lean into that a little bit. And make no mistake about it, I think Emily Armstrong took an important teeny baby step in making that apology. It was just it was insufficient. It wasn't enough. And she needs to take a giant step. She needs to speak out against Scientology and leave. It's going to be so difficult for her because of her upbringing, her indoctrination, even being a gay woman. And also, she's close with her mom. I mean, I never met Emily, but I met Gail sometime in the 90s when she was editor of Freedom Magazine. Then I worked with her in 2005. She was no longer at Freedom, meaning no longer part of OSA. When I worked with her in 2005, she was part of what's called IMPR, which is International Management PR, which is up at the international base. And then sometime later, she was busted and thrown in the hole. If you're hearing any of this information about it, Gail, it all came from me. Because I gave Aaron Smith-Levitt a bunch of background on the story. So then she got thrown in the hole. Then she got let out of the hole. She got reassigned as a script writer at Gold. And then I was at Scientology Media Productions. Then I got in trouble there for being a naughty boy because Scientology hates naughty boys. They hate naughtiness at all costs. It's the worst thing in the world. Or actually, they kind of say they hate it, but they love it because it's an excuse for them to extract more money out of you to help you with those problems. Okay, hold on. I just want to put this up from Bridge 1872, this comment. Bridge 1872 says, when I was in Clearwater for the Scientology block party, they actually had all the front group buildings open. Typically, those buildings are closed and looked empty inside. What happens in those buildings? Okay, hold that thought. I'm going to star this, and we're going to get back to it because I can absolutely answer that. And she's also asking on a daily basis. So yeah, I can definitely answer that for you. We'll talk about that. Not a whole lot is going on there, but I can tell you maybe the best answer is nothing, but we can talk about what the intended purpose for that is. So let me see, where was it? Okay, so Gail. So I was watching this whole Emily Armstrong, the whole thing, and I'm watching it, and I'm like, I don't know her. I've never met her, but I know her mom really well. Like the last year and a half I was at Gold, like we were together every day, um, working on scripts. Like I couldn't get rid of her because she was also, I had a really bad sleep disorder and I was having trouble. I would fall asleep during the day. And I remember telling Gail, I don't need you here right now because sometimes I need to write on my own. And she's like, well, I can't leave. And she very timidly admitted that our quote unquote senior had insisted that she stay in my office in case I fall asleep. And she felt like Gail felt really bad about that because it's not something she wanted to do. But we worked together. We wrote scripts together. We hung out. I have to tell you, if there's 3 people from Gold that if I woke up in the morning and there was a genie sitting on the end of my bed, uh, it's a weird image, but and that person said, the genie said, pick 3 people. I'm going to change their minds and they're going to leave Scientology. One of them would be Gail Armstrong, because I had very few people that I really considered friends and liked in the sewer. Gail was definitely one of them. She's very smart, recruited straight out of journalism school, got love bombed into thinking that she could work for this magazine and help change the world. I mean, who gets to go straight out of college to edit like a pretty glossy looking magazine, right? So, but the thing that I really want to stress is that Gail Armstrong was not the propaganda that she's being made out to be. For one thing, Freedom Magazine, it's a part of OSA, but there is like a titanium hardened steel wall between the dirty tricks division of OSA and Freedom Magazine. And the reason for that is, think of David Miscavige as a mafia boss, right? He doesn't want the people that have to represent him to the world as a good guy. He doesn't want them in the dirty business. He doesn't want them to know. He just wants to make sure that they're clean and just lie to them, because I did that. I mean, when I was really bubbled when Tom Tobin and what's his name, Joe Childs from the Tampa Bay Times, they came to Gold. They were before the article, the Truth Rundown. A few years before that, they did a profile of David Miscavige. They came to Gold, and Miscavige asked me. He said, "Can you let them interview you?" And I sat there and I talked about his leadership style and what a great guy he was to work for, because that was my reality. Because I was treated really well, and that was before his mask dropped, and I saw the abuse, and it became obvious that the privilege and the favoritism was love bombing. It wasn't like because I deserved it or earned it. It was So my point is that the reason Freedom Magazine is kind of walled off is because they have these high level professional journalists, and those guys, they need to not know, so they keep it really separate. So this is not to make excuses for Emily Armstrong. I mean, her support, even though she apologized for it, sort of Danny Masterson was horrible. She runs in that little indoctrinated crowd. But it's like, I think of all the times I sat with her mom and listened to her mom talk about her and how close they are and how much she supported her, even being a gay woman, and that she would get time off from Gold and she'd go to, to see her daughter and da 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 da. And I know, because the way we were all sort of walled off from all that abuse and stuff. And yes, Emily needs to really do the difficult thing and get the hell out and speak out about it. She needs to have the mental, actually process the stuff, because that's the closest way, the straightest line between the 2 dots of where her mom is now and her mom getting out is Emily speaking out. If she really wanted to help her mom, which she would speak out. So I felt a little stressed about hearing this stuff about, Gail Armstrong and Gail being like some architect of propaganda, and they're the ones that are really to blame, and da 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 da. Like, people that are abused become abusers, hurt people. And Gail is like not an abuser. She's a writer. She writes speeches, and she worked with me for a little bit on the Industry of Death Museum, and we wrote a bunch of ads together, and it was just like, it wasn't like, oh, let me take some time off from tapping people's phones and fair gaming them. That's a whole different activity. I mean, it's like, you have like, I don't know if you ever saw 3 Days of the Condor with Robert Redford, but he was like a CIA analyst who just read books. He read books to try to decode stuff. He wasn't a field agent, so he had no idea about all the black ops and all this stuff. And it's like, even in an organization like the CIA, you have these walled partitions and you have parts of that. And the dirty tricks part of OSA is completely separate from Freedom Magazine. So, you know, I even saw one person commented that Emily's apology was maybe like some kind of written by OSA or something. Like, for all intents and purposes, her mom was never in OSA. Her mom edited the magazine that is run by OSA, like it's was under their guise. But the magazine is doing terrible now, and it's really, really good news. So as I said, I haven't gotten an issue out. And I'll have a lot more information about this when I do the stream, because people don't realize, I've spoken about it a little, but the Scientology media production is that $100 million paperweight. Miscavige, he established that so he could do this on television, this kind of stuff. And he could do exposés on Alex Gibney and Joe Childs and Tom Tobin and Tracy McManus and all these people that are his, enemies, right? That was the whole reason why he opened a broadcast station. Well, that, and he could never go back to gold because he just thought too many people had effed him over there. But yeah, and they never did it. I mean, if anybody watches the network, and I do suggest, if you're channel surfing, go look at it. They don't take IP addresses. You don't need to log in. They're not going to know who you are. But watch it for 5 minutes. You'll be amazed. Like, just scroll through the menus and look at the stuff. I do that occasionally because I've noticed that since I left, and that's a time frame thing. That's not because of me, but since that period when I left, there's hardly anything new on that network. I mean, hardly anything. They keep announcing, oh, we have a new season. It's a new season of what? Yeah, but anyway, it's and then they had the journalists, the 5 journalists. One of them was caught snorting cocaine in the bathroom at OSA at the HGB. That wasn't good. Another one, so he got booted out with a $100,000 package to write a book and shut up. And the person that was going to rat him out, another journalist, because that's a huge problem in Scientology. That person a journalist who discovered the guy was snorting coke. And I hope OSA is just like, I can hear their assholes slam shut, because I'm the only person that knows about all this stuff, that's actually out and speaking about it. So then there was another journalist, and then she was going to rat him out because she really thought Miscavige was a great guy. And, you got to protect the brand, and got to get rid of this guy. She didn't realize that all the people at OSA that vetted that guy are now going to get, shit canned in a ton of ethics trouble. So then they booted her out of there. And then 2 other journalists left because, one of them left because he hated David Miscavige. That's a whole other story, why he became to hate him. And then the other one left because they were very concerned about his reaction to his friend snorting cocaine. And by the way, that guy, I have it on good authority that he's in a 12-step program and he's doing fine. Which is, Scientology, if they're so good helping people on drugs, they should have helped that guy instead of like kicking him out. And then, shutting him up with $100,000 and making him write a book. You literally write a book. We'll give you $100,000. Don't ever come back. We'll give you $10,000 a month for 10 months and sign this, and you can never speak about it. So, because that's how they like to do things. So then they booted the woman out, who was an incredibly talented writer, because she wanted to rat the guy out, and everybody was freaked out. They don't want people tattletelling, that stuff getting up to Miscavige, so they got rid of her. And then the other one quit because they were worried about his reaction to the cocaine scenario. And so they invited him into the basement of SMP, which is where HCO is. and shoved my comment, which was full of lies and crazy perverted stuff, shoved that in his face and said, if you don't shape up, we're going to do to you what you did to Mitch Brisker. And he's like, okay, I'm leaving. And they were starting to insist that these non-Scientology professional journalists submitted themselves to metered security checks once a week. And they were all like, no, this place is insane. So this is really good news. This is not because of outside pressure from anybody. This is because they are so crazy. They're literally eating themselves alive. So I got a question from Peter Anderson. Hey, Peter, thanks for showing up. Emily said that she empathizes with the victims of abuse and violence. Is she claiming to be a victim herself? And how do that conform with the organization beliefs being a victim? I think, Peter, you're being too logical about this. She's trying to correct the situation. She doesn't fully know how to do it because she's lost in Scientology. The way you make this apology is you ask for forgiveness, and you ask for forgiveness for the damage that you caused. She never mentioned that. She said, I think it was wrong or it was a mistake. I made a mistake. You have to say, look, I want you to forgive me for the damage I created. But the thing is, she's not claiming to be a victim when she says I have empathy. She's claiming to be an empathetic person. Claiming to be a victim would be like, I have empathy because I was victimized in the same way. I was SA'd, I was whatever. But she's not claiming to be a victim. She's just trying to get some positive, she's trying to clear the air a little bit. She's doing a really bad job doing it because, it's like, if she came out and just for I don't know you, Emily, but if you see this, I know your mom. She's a terrific person, and she deserves to have an opportunity to get out of Scientology. Anyway, and I wish you would speak out about that. So, but I hope you understand that her statement that she empathizes with them. I mean, I empathize with them, and I've never experienced that kind of abuse. She's just claiming to be empathetic. It's a teeny little baby step where what was needed was a gigantic step. Okay. Yeah, Bill. What a hater for ratting out the cook guy. Well, she thought she was doing the right thing because this is a person that I knew and I really admired because they were a very talented writer. And she'd been kind of love bombed into thinking David Miscavige was this great guy. And, they were all on a first day basis. They're the Freedom Writers. They all moved from the shitty offices at the HGB into incredibly spectacular offices over at Scientology Media Productions, are brand new, they were designed by one of the top architectural firms in the world. Who wouldn't want to work there just as an environment? So she thought she was doing the right thing. She's like, does Dave know about this? We got to tell him. And she's saying that to people that are like, if you tell him that, we're all going to get killed because we vetted the guy. Because Dave's first question is going to be, how could you put a guy who's snorting coke on my, what they call lines? In other words, on my, working environment. So yeah, exactly. What a hater. She's just dumb. She just didn't know because the Scientology is such an upside down world. It's such a house of mirrors. In the real world, you'd go to the boss and you go, hey, we need to handle this guy. And you'd be rewarded. In Scientology, you just get kicked out. I mean, she got like the guy, she got like a big check and got assigned to write a book and like, don't come back. This is an interesting question. YRB says, how many people with R1 visas did you work with? I'm not sure. Is that an accusation? Maybe I'm too sensitive. Or is that just a matter of interest? Well, okay. For those of you that don't know, an R1 visa is a religious worker visa. When I worked with people, I did not ask to see their immigration status or their paperwork. I can tell you in the video on my channel, I did what for Scientology, which is my reaction video to the gold video. I talk about the R1 visa situation. So I worked with, I'm trying to figure this out and give you an answer. There were a lot of foreigners at gold. So I would assume maybe 20% of the people up there, and I'm talking about back in the days when there's 300-400 people, I would estimate about 20% of them who hadn't found a a citizen to marry, right? Because that's also like heavily promoted in Scientology. Like, we need to keep this guy here. Will somebody marry him or her? Somebody with, a green card or who's a citizen. So yeah, a lot. I would assume they were all on R1 visas, because these are people that would be like, I'd hear them saying, yeah, I got to get my visa renewed or whatever. And so I would assume that they're all on R1 visas. So, but that's a really prevalent thing. That's one of the things that, like, when I wrote my congressman, that's one of the things that I said, that they don't follow public policy with regard to people that are disabled, in terms of the LGBTQ community, in terms of uh, ethnicity. There's a lot of real evidence of violations of all those things, and all those things are considered public policy. And in order to be tax exempt, you need to follow public policy. So, and violating the R1 visas would be a violation of public policy. So that's one of those things, when you write your congressman, like, mention that the Church of Scientology illegally uses the R1 visa program to traffic people to America. Even if they're not trafficking them, I mean, even if they're fully agreed, I want to go, and they let them keep their passports and they're happy to make $50 a week, still, you can't bring people to America on an R1 visa and then put them to work in a restaurant and washing dishes. That's not religious work. Yeah, I'm sorry. That was my subtle humor. I get it. It's not an accusation. I didn't think it was. I didn't think you were trolling me at all. I think you wanted me to bring up the issue because you know that I worked probably with a lot. And I'm telling you, I would guess it was about 20% of the people that I worked with. Uh, okay. I'm sorry if I made you feel uncomfortable by saying that. YRB says, please understand, I feel as a U.S. citizen that we invited these people here and we share a responsibility for their well-being. Yeah, you're right. I mean, that's being a good citizen. Yeah, like the people in Haiti that we invited, that are now being accused by some people of eating cats, and now they're like, their physical health is being threatened, and they're closing schools down. It's created a whole. I mean, yeah, we bring these people here. You're absolutely right. That's a really good point. I wouldn't have thought of that. What is this? YRB. My opinion is they should be given green card, permanent residency, and freed from Scientology. Yeah, sure. I mean, a lot of them might be taking advantage of an opportunity because the situation in their own home country is not good. So yeah, I think when people, yeah, there you go. So people escape Scientology, they go to the U.S. consulate and they say, I'm leaving a cult and I need a green card. Yeah, that would be great. No, there's actually something there. I love that idea. Thank you very much. What else do we got here? Okay, so let's hide that. I want to answer this earlier question, which was from Bridge 1872. When I was in Clearwood at the Scientology block party, they actually had all the front group buildings open. Typically, those doors are closed and look empty inside. What happens in those buildings? Well, the SBCs are part of what is known in Scientology as Division 6. Division 6 is the public division. It's the division that interacts with New Public, and it's broken down into 3 departments. Div 6A, that's brand new public, like the test center that the protesters shut down. That is Div 6A. That's new public. You get them in, you test them, you fill them full of shame and guilt, and then convince them that the shame and their guilt they're feeling is reason why they need to join Scientology. That's Div 6A. Div 6B is, God, am I forgetting what Div 6B is? Div 6B is it's like activities for existing Scientologists who interact with New Public. And then 6C is, it's where they get existing Scientologists to come in and start groups, like to start a Way to Happiness group, or maybe to open up a Narcanon. They call them like the New Civilization Builders. It's part of Div 6C. So that's what would go on in those buildings. would mostly be to bring public in and then to try to gain public support of Scientology by showing like, oh, you're interested in education, or you're interested in morals, education, or you're interested in criminal reform, or you're interested in volunteerism for disaster relief. They have all these programs. And so one of the things that goes on in the buildings is that people can go in and actually sign up to form groups, and they don't even have to be Scientologists. You could go in there and say, I want to, start a volunteer ministers group, and we'll raise money and whatever, and we'll go to disaster sites and whatever. And then all of it just ultimately feeds into a machine where Scientology then uses the activity to create documentaries and all kinds of PR that they then show to Scientologists at events to keep them convinced that Scientology is doing good things. So that's basically what happens. It's just they're trying to express goodwill right here in the front of every Freedom magazine, where it says investigative reporting in the public interest. So they're there. The keywords there are public interest. They exist in the public interest. So when people go in there, they're being informed about these programs. It's not surprising that nobody's really going into those places. And I hope when you went to the open house that they had some nice baked goods, at least, that they were giving away, because they love. Okay. CEO Bill says, new life goal. We've just extended CEO Bill's bucket list. Do some lines in the men's room at the HGB, get 120K. Yeah, absolutely. Well, first you got to get a job as a journalist. And they're advertising. Tony Ortega did an article months ago. He found the ad in some trade publication where they're trying to legitimately hire like actual, journalists, because nobody wants to work for them. So if you could kind of, so CEO Bill, if you could fake some credentials and maybe counterfeit some articles you did and answer that ad, right? And then, if you have the skill, it's not that hard. You could probably use AI to write a couple of articles for them. And you wouldn't even have to do the coke. You could just kind of counterfeit it. All you have to do is wait for somebody to walk in. I don't want to condone drug use, except weed's okay, because the weed's not really a drug. So you could just wait for somebody to walk in and then, snort some, whatever as they use in movies for fake coke. And yeah, you'd probably get a check. Yeah. So Bridge 1872 said, yeah, thank you for the explanation. They were definitely using as Div 6A that day of the block party, inviting public to spew the propaganda. Yeah, I mean, all of those social betterment campaigns are all really part of Div 6, because they're public outreach. They're any place a Scientology has contact with the public it would be part of Division 6. I know a lot about that, because I did the whole Div 6. If you guys have ever seen the displays like at the test center or at an org where it's even more massive, they have whatever, maybe 22 displays, a big high def screens, and there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of videos. So I did that for 18 months. I spent designing it and figuring the videos out and shooting new videos, and it wasn't worth it. And the money's gone. So hey, I still have some of it. So how did you know they had a platter? Okay, what does this mean? Oh, platters. Oh, how did I know they had platters? Oh, because that's their MO. They like, yeah, there's no way they would have an event like that in an open house, and they wouldn't put out some nice plates, maybe some cheese and fruit or some baked goods or some nice coffee, maybe, have a European coffee experience. Yeah, it's just what they do. I knew because I saw it a lot. So here we're having, okay, good. Here's more from Bridge. Actually, Osa told me I was not invited as I walked in after I was invited in by a Sea Org. I was live streaming. Well, yeah, I mean, good for you. I'd love to know how much you got. Yeah, they don't want that shit live streamed. Are you kidding? They want, because they can't control the situation. They need a 100% Yeah. So YRB says powdered sugar would probably do, LOL. Well, having experience both in doing drugs and in shooting people doing drugs in films, I can tell you the thing you want to use is called milk sugar. And milk sugar is what drug dealers use to cut cocaine with. And milk sugar is actually a baby laxative. And so if you snort enough of it, and you do have like a constipation problem, you can kill two birds with one stone. So, but milk sugar would be the thing to do. You can actually get it. I don't know where we used to get it. There's one from Mexico. It's like a block of chalk. And you take a razor blade and you scrape off the powder. It looks exactly like cocaine, and when you snort it, it doesn't hurt your nose. It's just slightly sweet if you taste it. So it's what I think that's what they use. And I wouldn't snort powdered sugar. That would be painful. Hey, look who's here. Hey, philosophy. Hi. Yeah, you missed my whole TED talk on fake cocaine, on how you can see a Bill had this great idea, following in the footsteps of a journalist who snorted coke in the OSA bathroom and got kicked out with $100,000 book deal and told, don't ever come back and don't talk about us. And CEO Bill says, like, this is like bungee jumping. I'm bungee jumping here because I don't have a moderator and I'm just clicking on your shit and putting it up. So, CEO Bill says, informs local homeless community about free food every first Thursday night at the Mission. Yeah, I've heard about that caper. Somebody said there was. I heard a famous one. It was at a Mission. Somebody printed up flyers about there were free beer and pizza, and handed it out at homeless locations. Oh, good. I'm so glad you caught the end. Drop me an email. I can fill you in if you have any question. Hopefully you won't. So there you go. So that's interesting, Bridge. So you were an OSA staff member invited you, and then when you walked in with your camera, and which you're doing them a favor because you're spreading the word after all, then they uninvited you. That's very interesting. That would have made a great stream, I gotta tell you, streaming that stuff. So yeah, we're gonna be doing Freedom Magazine, and it blows my mind that they have not been able to. Yeah, the cocaine snorting journalist, he actually has some articles in here. I see his name, but I'm not gonna dox the guy because he's a good guy and he's left and he's clean. So he doesn't deserve that shit. And then occasionally they'll do in the magazine, like they'll do, this is Drug Free World. This is the kids in London at the Olympics handing out, they're just saying no to drugs program, which is like, you're talking about people that would like chain their children in a basement with a bowl of water before they let them smoke a joint. It's just, anyway. Oh yeah, absolutely. So Portland SB supporter says camera live streaming equals protesters to them. Oh yeah, absolutely. Hey guys, just give me 1 second. I gotta grab. Okay, we're back. That was my. I hope you. My LA manhole cover background. Camera live streaming. Okay, so OBG Foster says, "LOL, sounds like jerk-free world." Yeah, well, we don't want that. We want to live in a kind of a jerky world. Jerky is fun. And Bridge says, yes, they had a scavenger hunt that encouraged public to go into the building. I was walking past the building and a Sea Org member invited me, and that's crazy. Otherwise referred to as a body router. You were, walked in there, they were body routing you. Yep. I think the answer to philosophy's question at Bridge, so you were invited in but kicked out. Yep, that's what they do. Yep. And then Bridge says answers, and then he proceeded to invite me in the show, invite me in the show and show me the Scientology wall of human rights. Oh yeah, no kidding. So yeah, they're real big on that. Yeah, but some of this stuff. Oh, here's a good one. I'll get into this one. Not today, but when I do the stream. Here's an article on ECT, a short history. And Scientology, they're not the only, very anti-mental health, but they're not the only ones that want to reform the use of ECT. It's not good. So they can kind of they can kind of piggyback onto an issue that maybe has some legitimacy, like there are no long-range studies of people who've received ECT and had positive outcomes. It maybe is something they should stop doing. It's very damaging. And I don't just say that from past Scientology indoctrination. But they'll jump on that thing to make themselves look good. And, and then they'll always then push something like this. They'll put in a Scientology. And all of these people, I have to just tell you, not one of the people on that page are Scientologists. Those are all actors. Some of them I know. I worked with them. David Miscavige will not let anybody who's actually a Scientologist do anything like that. Appear in a film, appear in an ad, because too many of them have spoken out, have left and spoken out. Now think about that. That would have to be just that fact alone, that there's that Scientology has that bias against its own members, would be enough to tell you the whole thing is a scam. The whole thing is just a ridiculous enterprise. The fact that they don't embrace their own talent to let them do I mean, they'll let them do testimonials, but just in-house to other Scientologists, not to the world at large. Oh, my Amazon wish list link is in there's a link tree. Thank you, Peter, for asking that question. Where's my Amazon wish list link? It's on my channel page. There's a link tree. And if you click the link tree, it's on there. Philosophy says, my dad said he's seen ECT work on people. It's still done to my knowledge, but are better able to tell who it will work on. Yeah, I'm sure that it's, yeah, I know they've made some ways of making it less harmful and so forth. And it's, from what I understand, and I've had personal experience, I've never had ECT, but I've definitely had interaction with people who have had it like the day before. And in cases of very severe depression, it can interrupt that depressive cycle. And the person who is experiencing that depressive state is grateful for that. But when I was researching my book, I had access to academic databases and I had help doing research. And one of my research queries was long-range studies, long-term studies of the outcomes of people who've had ECT, like 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. They don't exist. It's never been studied. And from my own personal observation, the studies aren't good. I mean, the outcomes tend to not be good. I'm not going to rail against it, because if somebody says they've seen it work or it's helped somebody, I'm not going to say, well, it didn't help you. But I do think that there's better ways than traumatizing a person by inflicting. I mean, it kills brain cells. I mean, it destroys your memory. One of the reasons you feel better is because you're so it's like you get hit in the head with a baseball bat. You're not thinking about the fact that you lost your job and your spouse left you because you got hit in the head with a baseball bat. And so then they asked the person about the thing that was making them depressed. Okay, look, I'm going to put a link in my show notes. There's a guy, I don't know if any of you ever watch him, Dr. K, the Healthy Gamer. I don't know if this guy's got like 4 million followers on YouTube. He's got a couple of million followers on Twitch. He was formerly, as a college student, or when he was young, he was a gaming addict. He became a monk, and then he went to medical school, became a psychiatrist. I think he's like the only mental health person I listen to on YouTube. He's done some amazing work, and he talks about a thing called shit life syndrome. And when he was an intern in a psychiatric hospital, he was doing rounds with a nurse, and there was a guy that was really not in good shape, and he asked what's wrong with that guy, and the nurse said, well, he's got shit life syndrome. It's like, what is that? Never heard about that in medical school. Oh, that's somebody, circumstantially their life falls apart, they start feeling bad, they go to a psychiatrist, they get diagnosed, they get a prescription, it doesn't help. They go to another psychiatrist, they get a prescription, it doesn't help. After a while, they're loaded up on 5 or 6 prescriptions. Their life hasn't turned around. They just have a shitty life. It's shit life syndrome. It's a real thing. And, unfortunately, there's a lot of people with shit life syndrome who could use real help and real counseling. He talks about, I'll find a link. I think you would all find it interesting. I was fascinated. I never heard the term shit life syndrome. But there's a lot of people that with shit life syndrome. And then at the end of the rope there, because the psychiatrists, a lot of them, don't know how to deal with this. And Dr. K's point is like, this person could go spend, an hour a day in therapy, and they're going to walk out of therapy into the same shitty life. So there's a little bit of a disconnect between some human problems and the way that psychiatry deals with them. And I'm not down on the mental health industry at all. I have a wonderful therapist. She's been on vacation for 2 weeks. I have an appointment with her tomorrow. I can't wait to see her. She's a terrific person. Very gifted as a healer. So I'm not down on it, but I definitely have problems with some of the psychiatric practices. Oh, so apparently philosophy's heard about it. Yes, shit life syndrome is real and most likely the reason for many mental health issues. Yeah, which means like, why are we giving drugs to somebody because they have a shitty life? Like, it doesn't make their life better. But Dr. K does a great job of explaining, like he compares these 2 cities where something happened in one city. I don't know, it was in Sweden or something. And it was a logging town and something happened to the logging. And then all of a sudden people in the town are starting to drink and they're starting to, unalive themselves. And then there's a parallel town. They used to be equal and then they're doing great there. And it's like, it's kind of like there's circumstantial depression, which is really, I would call despair. And then there's the actual illness where you have a depressive illness, and maybe shock therapy works on the depressive illness. Oh, hey, OBG Foster says Dr. Tracy Marks is an excellent YouTuber who talks about recent research. I'm going to check it out because having been in Scientology most of my life, studying, newly studying the mental health field, the latest types of therapies, how the latest therapies in therapy have integrated with Eastern religion and studying more about Eastern religion and all the things that was like, you don't have to study in Scientology because, you read Hubbard, you know everything there is to know, but I'm definitely going to check that out. I appreciate that. YRB says, I used to recommend parenting classes for children with discipline problems in school. I would identify it as being BP or bad parenting. Yeah, the parents have a lot of responsibility of that, but then they all need help. It's not like you can't just blame the parents. So philosophy said, I grew up visiting the psychiatric hospital my dad worked at. I would sit with patients sometimes, and I always thought the drugs were a nicer way of giving them a lobotomy. Yeah, it's true. I mean, I did at one point after I left Scientology a while ago. I did have a real severe mental crisis, and I ended up getting 5150. It's not something I talk a lot about. So I had personal experience. We had a very broken mental health system. I was there for 3 days. And it's definitely, Scientology says it's a chemical lobotomy. That's not untrue. There are some drugs, some benzodiazepines. If a person is having really like an anxious episode that they can't get past, that drug can be very helpful for that. I know when I fly, I'll go to my doctor and say, I need a Xanax. I'm flying to, but that stuff's good for anxiety. The jury is still out on antidepressants. Apparently, a recent study showed that they're only 2% more effective than a placebo. But I talked to a woman in a psych ward who literally had been railroaded there, a middle-aged woman, was turned into the cops by one of her neighbors who said she was acting weird when she wasn't, obviously. She'd been in there for 2 weeks. They pumped her full of Haldol, and she had like that drug should be illegal. It's what the Soviets used to pump children in orphanages with to just get them to shut up, and political dissidents. It literally is a chemical lobotomy, and it gives you a disorder called tardive dyskinesia, which is like Parkinson's disease. It's a nervous system disorder. And I'd studied about it when I was doing anti-psychiatry stuff for Scientology, and I thought tardive dyskinesia was the effect of long-term use of antipsychotic drugs like Haldol. And this woman was in there for 2 weeks on Haldol, and she was shaking. She had palsy she had tardive dyskinesia from 2 weeks of Haldol. So it's just, this is not helping people. A lot of these places, and I know people who have been like suicidal, and it saved their life, but they can be very re-traumatizing to be at, which is really, really, yeah. Yeah, philosophy says, it says, sorry, I should have said that was the 80s and 90s, and the drugs those people were on were not good, and many are no longer used. Yeah, well, I'm glad to hear that. But the one that I'm familiar with and have seen with my own eyes what it does to people is Haldol. And, I made this documentary for the Industry of Death about the treatment of political dissidents in the Soviet Union, because in the Soviet Union, being a political dissident was deemed a mental disorder. And so they didn't have to try people. Just the fact, if you had a printing press in your basement and you were printing anti-communist leaflets, you had a mental disorder, you were thrown in a hospital, and they just pumped you full of Haldol. And we had film, I don't know where they got it, but we had film of children and adults, literally complete zombies that were handcuffed to beds for long periods of time. And when they were conscious, they were all shaking and weird. So, and then when I got out of Scientology, I'm like, well, a lot of that stuff's bullshit. And then I got to observe it firsthand in a psychiatric hospital. That it's really bad. I mean, it is a bad thing. But then I know people who have been helped by psychiatrists, who've been helped by antidepressants. And I should say that the people that I know that were helped by psychiatrists they're psychiatrists that still practice psychotherapy, because that's, I spoke with a psychiatrist and about the drugging. I'm like, because this guy asked me, do you have a psychiatrist? And I said, well, I talked to somebody at Kaiser, but we just talked for a few minutes, and all she wants to talk about is medication. And he said, well, that's all we talk about. I was really shocked. Like, there's no kind of psychotherapy. They don't talk. They don't ask you anything. They're just like, they just want to get your symptoms. Like, how depressed are you? Do you ever feel like unaliving yourself? Okay, well, we're going to try this drug. Come back in 6 weeks. If it doesn't work, we'll try another drug, or we'll change the dosage. The whole thing's just a crapshoot. But then, I know, like, my therapist is a wonderful person. And I love saying that because I know Oss is watching, and then it feeds into the machine of Mitch Brisker as being controlled by the psychiatric industry. And I just love that. But yeah, thanks, philosophy. There's no problem. I appreciate your clarifying that. And this says, antidepressants worked for me in a week, changed me from suicidal to normal. Tardive dyskinesia is rate and better than being dead. Yeah, that's true. I mean, I would say in the case that I observed, I don't know that I would agree that it's better than being dead. Listen, I have close friends who antidepressants saved them. Like, I'm not saying, like, I'm not down on it. I just, like, one particular person I'm thinking of who's on a number of drugs, and they're doing fine. They're doing okay. They do have episodes. They never then done the work. And I think, once you sort of calm down, don't you think, OGB Foster, that you need to engage in some kind of work to learn maybe the mechanisms of how you end up that way and so forth? Because I know I'm very averse to taking them myself, only because they don't work. I'm like a side effects person. Like, I've taken some of these drugs, and whatever the side effects are, in every case, I get the side effects. But I'm glad that they worked for you in a week. That's actually pretty amazing, because they usually say, you need to take them for 6 weeks. And I did meet a person who was suffering from schizophrenia, and they definitely were helped with some form. I don't know what form of antipsychotic, but absolutely. And this was like a tech software person who worked at a major studio. Like it wasn't some, you know. So yeah, I'm not. Yeah. So CEO Bill says lots of problems in abuse of psychiatry. It's unfortunate the legitimate criticism is conflated with Scientology. Another, yeah, that's totally true. Unfortunately, because if you're anti-psychiatry, people automatically assume that you're a Scientologist. And there's some great things in psychiatry. There's this emerging field of gut health where they're realizing that most of the serotonin that your body produces, it produces in your gut. And by improving people's gut health, they've cured well, not ADHD, but they've cured some serious mental disorders by just, improving. I know a young woman who's from Denmark. I met a woman who just graduated from university, and she has a degree in this new emerging field in psychiatry that has to do with your gut biome. So there's a really exciting work going forward. And then that precludes the use of things like shock therapy and drugs that they don't even really understand. So it's, yeah, so YRB, yeah, nervous tics. I think you're referring to the tardive dyskinesia. To me, it looks like a palsy thing, like Parkinson's. Here's kind of a very abstract question from OGB Foster. After you learn how modern psychiatry is, would you consider doing a film debunking COS propaganda? Yeah, but yeah, I would. I absolutely would. But I don't know that that's the battle that I want to fight. Like, I don't know that that's, especially because there's some issues. I think a really great documentary would be on the new emerging technologies and discoveries in psychiatry that really make shock therapy look like how we have arrived eventually with the lobotomy, with our view on the lobotomy. All of a sudden that became, no, that's barbaric. We're not going to slice people's brains up anymore. And I think these new technologies in psychiatry make ECT and some of these drugs look as barbaric as the lobotomy. So, and I've not, that would be like, I would watch that documentary in a second and it would also cover the emerging work with psychedelics and mental health. I think there's been some documentaries on that. So yeah, I would definitely do it, but it's just like, you got to live, and it's just, I don't have the resources to just go into development on something like on a speculative basis. But I will say, whether I would do it or not, it's a really valid idea. And I wouldn't just show how Scientology fights against psychiatry and also denies its members proper mental health care. I mean, I was thinking about this the other day. Just statistically, the number of people in Scientology that are on the spectrum, that have ADHD or have autism, there's got to be a considerable amount. Plus, those people might tend, in some cases, to be more susceptible to being pulled into a cult. They're never going to get a diagnosis. They're never going to get help. They're never going to have the opportunity to get the support that they need to learn maybe the mechanisms to navigate this world. Yeah, and like, to me, I'm working on a project that has, I can't really go into it, but it very much is leaning into the neurodivergent community. And so I mean, I have my own unique view. I don't know if it's unique, but I kind of see these neurological things like ADHD and autism as potentially evolutionary steps. Like, okay, imagine this, a mental experiment. Fish, over a long period of time, they developed legs and they walked out of the ocean. Okay, so you had fish and then you had mammals, right? In between there, you had a lot of really flopping around stuff that was probably complete genetic nightmares, struggling to get there. To me, some of these neurologic things like autism, I'm like, I wonder if this isn't an evolutionary phase of the humanity evolving the human mind for a future in which we need to, compete with AI. Because, I mean, we don't know that Einstein was autistic, but when you kind of look at him and his socialization, there's a lot of really smart people Yeah, even like Elon Musk, who apparently identifies as being autistic, who, I think is um, smart enough to pull off what he did, but, whatever. He's not a good person. Uh, okay, so I hope I answered that question. Okay, so Eileen Bradley said, a good friend of mine has been going to therapy for almost 20 years, and instead of helping her move on, they're helping her wallow by talking about the same thing over and over. He's sad. Well, I think I went through, that's unfortunate. I'm sorry for your friend. I went through about 5 therapists before I met one that I could get somewhere with. And I mean, he's helped me to the point where I don't know if I should even continue seeing her, because I'm like, why, we made so much progress, but I think that's she just has the wrong therapist. I mean, it's unfortunate that it lasted for 20 years, but you don't want to be sitting there talking about the same thing. Uh, so philosophy says, I'm not against it. There are some people who really need psychiatric hospital, but there is also things I don't agree with. I think it's institutionalization, and that is very damaging. That I can't add anything to that. That is a complete and perfect statement. There are absolutely people who are helped by it. I know somebody who, since the age of 8, had so many episodes, and if they didn't have the opportunity to be institutionalized, they wouldn't be alive today. And today they're doing great, and they're, have a family, and they're stable. And so, yeah, it's like, but it would just be great if the hospitals were not so traumatizing, right? Like, like if they build them out in the country, and just, you look at some of these hospitals and they look like prisons. It's just really ridiculous. Uh, yeah. Okay. So what else do we have here? Yeah, this is really a tough one. See what Bill says. At philosophy, agreed. Difficult foster kids are still getting dumped in psych hospitals, and even when they are mentally ill. Yeah, it's unfortunately, yeah, they've become this, to some degree, psychiatry, and especially with regard to the hospitals. They're almost a kind of weird branch of law enforcement. Like, they're almost more related to law enforcement than they are to like the mental science of healing. I mean, if you have a serious mental episode, it's the cops that come pick you up, and they'll handcuff you to a gurney and drag you into one of these places. And like, one thing I discovered that I really was disturbing is that the prison system is one of the has one of the largest opportunities for people to have mental health jobs. Like, you go to school, you get some kind of certificate, you're like a mental health, you're like not even a full-blown psychiatric nurse, you're like a psychiatric attendant. Most of the jobs for new people are in the prisons, so you find a lot of people in these psychiatric institutions came out of the prison system, and it's not a good place to learn how to deal with humanity. So, but yeah, so YRB says, yes, there is a need for dual approaches, just like we have rehab for a broken arm. Yeah, absolutely. Um, I don't, I sound like a Scientologist. I don't want to go there in terms of saying, like what Hubbard said, that we don't know enough about the human mind. But the fact is, we don't, because most people, I think, who are in prison because we lack the talent and the resources and the understanding to really help them out of the situation they're in. I mean, yeah, some people just need to be in prison, but my guess is 80% of the people in prison are only there because the resources are not available. The knowledge and the resources to help them are just not available. So they end up in prison. And prison is like such a huge industry. In the state of California, the correctional officers, it's the strongest labor union in the state. And they make more than school teachers. And that's not right, that you're paying correctional officers more than school teachers. And OBG Foster says it's a biological disease for some and a thinking disease for others. My therapist never considered sending me to a psychiatrist. She was a hammer and only saw me as a nail. Yeah, I don't know if you're saying that is a good thing or not. I mean, I know if my therapist felt that I needed the level of care, that level of care, she would not deny me that. But it's like I don't. So OBG Foster said, my mom took meds for 60 years and never got TD. Yeah, I don't know what meds she took, but I do know that it's a function of specific antipsychotics like Haldol. Philosophy asks, have you heard about what happened to Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys? He was given tons of antipsychotics that he didn't need. Really sad. Yeah, I know that. And the thing is, Brian Wilson he's another one. He was probably autistic. I mean, the guy was really kind of like, I don't want to say weird. He just was different, right? And it's just like, because that's the thing. It's not a disability. It's a different way of existing. They're differently brained. And Brian Wilson, you could kind of tell because he wasn't like, his socialization was, he was a little flat, but then his music was next world. So, yeah, they were probably treating him for just being a quirky genius, and they just destroyed his mind. I mean, it was like, I read this, I didn't put it up. Have you heard about what happened to Brian Wilson? Yeah, I have heard that. I know quite a bit about it. Now, what does this mean? OBG Foster says, at Eileen Bradley, I had one like that. My problem at work were trauma porn for her. Oh my God. Yeah, that's terrible. Like it's just trauma porn for your therapist. That's just like, yeah, no, this is true. You can't, OJB Foster says you can't diagnose mental illness with a blood test. It's guesswork, unfortunately. Well, yeah, you can say that, but I think a therapist who I consider a healer could rise to the level where their powers of observation would reduce the guesswork to an absolute minimum. Also, with this new emerging science of gut health, they're able to do tests to actually find like deficiencies in serotonin and how to fix stuff and like what's wrong on a like a chemical basis with your gut, because that's like most of the chemicals that affect your emotions are not produced in the brain, they're produced in the gut. So they've all these years they've been looking in the wrong place. But it's not well, philosophy, if you're saying that's an interesting theory because of what I'm talking about the gut biome, it's not a theory. It's like there are like, what do you call them? There's been trials where they've treated uh, depression, severe depression, by correcting the person's microbiome, their gut biome, so that they were then producing the right amount of chemicals and so forth. The relationship between your emotions and your gut is potentially more relevant than your relationship with your emotions and your brain or your adrenal system, your endocrine system rather. Uh, so yeah, that's a really exciting emerging thing. I mean, think about all the sayings, gut instinct. I feel it in my gut. My heart leaped into my, like all of these sayings that we have about how we feel emotionally. None of them have to do with like my head. I just felt it in my head. It's like, no, I felt it in my gut. So it's, I think we've been trying to tell ourselves that for a long time, and we're only just now figuring out. And so Peter Anderson says, question, were you ever involved with producing any of the testimonials that the organization put out to refute what actually happened in the Pack Ranch? Perhaps a stream on this content. No, I never was involved. I didn't do any of that. I did a little bit of review work on some hate sites and then shortly before I left. Uh, but so no, but I was never. But at the Peck Ranch, you're talking about what happened with the kids, not about what happened with the RPF before that. I will say this: that not everybody's experience with the Peck Ranch was the same. Some of those kids, especially some of the older ones who were maybe 14 when they went up there, they were in PAC. They were in LA. They were literally like had to run home at night to keep from being attacked by gangs, and they were isolated from their parents. So when the ranch was put there, it was put there so that those kids could get out of that environment and go up to where their parents were. So I'm really loath to say this because it sounds like I'm whitewashing it, but it was a better situation for them. And it was like, I've heard people say, oh, but they did, 6-year-olds were doing hard labor. Okay. And I'm thinking, I never saw 6-year-olds doing hard labor. I mean, I spent time at the ranch because I shot films out there, and I've told the story about how I became aware of these kids were so starved for adult, touch, to be seen by adults. And I was somebody, and they knew who I was, and they knew that I knew their parents, and their parents knew who I was. So it was kind of like they would attach themselves to me when I went out there. And it was not because they were such happy, wonderful kids. They were just love starved. So, but there was no 6-year-olds doing hard labor because 6-year-olds can't do hard labor. Like, go move those rocks. Like a 6-year-old can't even pick a rock up. So yeah, the big kids, the older kids, they hung drywall, they helped build the place, they did all this stuff. But at the time, they weren't thinking, "Oh, I'm miserable." This is like, at least they weren't living in Hollywood. So it's kind of like there's been a few that the conversation about the ranch has been dominated by a few individuals who really lean into the hyperbole, and that's not to say they didn't have a horrible experience, and I know so many of them that they're like, whatever. The ranch was like, whatever. When I found out later, and when I had my own kids, I found out, yeah, that was really shitty. That was fucked up. I mean, the older kids did the drywall and did the planting, and then the younger kids pulled the weeds. Uh, but they weren't thinking, oh, I'm being abused at the time. You know what I'm saying? They weren't like I don't even want to say it's not as bad as people say, but you need to talk to a bunch of different people to really get a picture. And a lot of these people, they don't care to speak out because they're like, whatever about the whole thing. It's just not their thing to go on YouTube and speak out. But not everybody had a really bad experience. Some people had horrific experiences. And unfortunately, it's called selection bias. The ones that have the really bad experiences are the ones that feel the most compelled to speak out. But they're actually a minority. And I know I'm probably going to lose subscribers for saying that, but it's just like, it's a fact. It's like with anything. And it's not like you could say, well, at Auschwitz, not all the Jews had a bad experience, but it wasn't Auschwitz. Like, it wasn't like it, I don't even think it qualified as a labor camp. I mean, a labor camp is where these people that were, in charge of those kids, they didn't know how to not fuck their lives up. The Germans were trying to kill the people at Auschwitz. The adults at the ranch were trying to bring them up in a Scientology context, which is horrible for a kid. But nobody really knew it. It's a whole different thing. Uh, so, and of course, I've not seen testimonials refuting the ranch, but they're bullshit because bad shit did happen there, but not to everybody. So yeah, I had nothing to do with that. So that's not for me. So that's it. Color. Okay, so yeah, this comment is from Eileen Bradley at OGB Foster. Yeah, it's just abusive at this point. You're referring to the situation with the therapist. She often calls me crying and absolutely devastated afterwards. Her therapist had locked in the same place for 20 years in her mind. Yeah, it's just there's some therapists that like I said, I went through 5 before I met somebody. Like, you need to be very intelligent when you're you can't just go, oh, you're a therapist, help me. You really need to have a conversation with the people. I met therapists that like, I knew more about, the mind, not because of Scientology, but because of my own study after Scientology. Like, I knew more than they knew. So I wasn't really thrilled about saying that. Uh, OGB Foster says worse than hospitals, the religious troubled teen industry. Oh my God. Yeah, like don't even get me started on that. I've spoken with a number of people since I've gotten on YouTube who reached out to me who in their younger years were put in some of these troubled teen uh, institutions, and they were abused in the most horrific ways imaginable. That's really a shame. They're definitely worse than the hospitals. Philosophy says, now, I'm not saying L. Ron Hubbard wasn't mental, but I think being against the psych system of the 40s and 50s wasn't wrong. Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah, but his motivation for doing it, you have to look at that as well. I mean, you're talking about in the 50s when, what's his name? Dr. Snyder was his name. I'm trying to think. He was the lobotomy guy. He had what's called you can look it up on, there's a Wikipedia article about him. He had what's called the lobotomobile, and he would travel to neighborhoods, and like if you were unhappy with your wife, or maybe you wanted to not divorce her, but you wanted to take up with your secretary, just have her a lobotomy. She'll just sit there and drool, and you can clean out her bedpan once a day. So yeah, it was really out of control, all that kind of stuff. And look at what's her name, oh God, the actress. I can't remember her name. I'm not prepared to do this right now. The actress, a beautiful blonde actress. She was played Jessica. What's her name? Played her in a movie. I just can't think of her name. Somebody help me out. She was turned into a psychiatric hospital by her mother, and she was shocked and lobotomized, and it just destroyed her. So yeah, the 40s and 50s, it was a rough time. I mean, yeah, there were a lot of things going on back then. The cops were beating gays up and dragging them to jail just for being gay. So it was pretty terrible. But the thing is, I mentioned his motivation. I mean, Hubbard had absolutely no interest. He never expressed any interest whatsoever in speaking out against psychiatry until he wrote a book and they trashed it. And then all of a sudden he was against them because they trashed his book. So, so much for being a mental health warrior. Okay, no, I did that one. Yeah, OBG Foster says a high number of people in prison have ADHD. Yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all. I mean, I think pretty much everybody in prison has some form of treatable mental disorder, which they may have gotten by being in prison, because that will definitely, I'm sure, will completely make you nuts. I've heard the highest percentage of people or it's very common for people with borderline personality disorder to end up in prison. A lot of people with that particular disorder, which is very difficult to treat. Some people can do it. Yeah. So Bridge says, yeah, prison system is a big business. I have heard it referred to in California as the prison industrial system. In California, all of the prisons are bid on and built by private industry. The food service in California prisons, this could be true for other prisons across the country, I don't know. The food service is private, and the prison lobby, which is basically the correctional officers lobby, have lobbied for completely private prisons. We have in California, and I'm sure it's in other states, a thing called the 3 strikes law, which means, on your 3rd felony, you're going away for life, or some incredible amount of time. That was put on the ballot by money from the prison industrial complex. Now think about that. The lobby that represents those that build prisons, make the food for prisons, and hire the prison guards, they lobbied to get a bill called the 3 strikes bill that passed, because that bill put more people in jail, and that's how they make their money. And so there's something really wrong with that, especially in California. This is supposed to be such a progressive state, but it's also, because I don't want to do politics, but corporations have a stranglehold on America, and it's both sides are to blame. Oh, okay. No, philosophy. Yeah. Okay, good. I got it. Yeah. My theory about us being evolution. Yeah. I kind of really believe this. Okay. So I developed a professional artistic relationship with a person uh, with autism. And then that grew into it was a creative project. And, I'm not going to go into it right now. I'll talk about it more when it's happening. But so then I became somewhat immersed in this community. And I was just shocked at some of the genius level ways of looking at things. And I started thinking about this and I started wondering if the human mind needs to take the brain rather needs to take an evolutionary jump getting from point A to point B, there's going to be some weird stuff along the way, right? It has to be the way evolution works, right? It takes a long time. So, like I said, with the fish walking out of the ocean, it's going to be kind of funky, like those weird little animals in Blade Runner, like the little genetic freaks. There's going to be some of that. But then what you arrive at the end is this kind of, uh, it's more a, a mind that's capable of thinking with such a deep degree of abstraction and decoding symbolism and thinking of new ways to do things that just started to wonder that maybe we're not seeing, that the because if you think about it, there's neurotypicals and there's neurodivergent, and go back to the fish theory, like the fish idea of evolution. All of the fish that were swimming around happy to be fish were neurotypical fish, right? Or biotypical, whatever. The ones that were like, no, you know what? I'm gonna walk the hell out of here, right? Even though there's only 25% of the earth is land, that's where I want to be. And I'm sure there are other fish were going, that guy's like, he's like biodivergent, right? And then that becomes the evolutionary pathway for the species to evolve. So anyway, that's just one of my crazy. Okay. Oh yeah, I know about this. Yeah, the poo transplants. This is crazy. They're studying poo transplants for ulcerative colitis too. They're doing a lot of stuff with poo. Apparently, there are some microorganisms in your poo that can save your life from a number of diseases. The problem is getting the microorganisms out into a safe state that they can put in your body because there's a lot of bad stuff in poo. It's why the word eat shit is kind of like not a pleasant term. But yeah, that's another part of the emerging science which is also relevant to gut health, because they're also talking about these transplants that are microorganisms that only exist in feces that can be extremely helpful. Um, well, this is good to know. FYI, OBG Foster says second generation antipsychotic meds don't cause TD. That's good because that's good to know. I have absolutely talked to people who said, yeah, I wouldn't want to take them again, but boy, they saved my life. So that's a good thing. Yeah, no, this is true. Maybe I spoke. I mean, you're right. I've not seen it, but we've all heard the stories about the 6-year-olds in Indonesia that are sewing soccer balls together because their little fingers are just so good at it. So yeah, you're right. They can do labor. So let's just leave it at this. My main point is not everybody's experience um, was the same there. Like some of them were as screwed up as it was and how they wish they had a real childhood and all the bad things they have to say about it. They're like, it wasn't as bad as some of these people are saying. So that's my only point is like, let's listen to each individual and take their story for what it is and try to form an overall picture. And I'm not saying Scientology is not as bad as you think it is, because if you ask me, I will tell you it's worse than you think it is. Uh, yeah. So thank you. So I can't get your comment up there because StreamYard sucks. Uh, what did I do here? Okay. So anyway, thank you, philosophy. She says, I agree that everyone has a different experience and a perspective and all are valid. The problem is, yes, part of the problem is the context within the context of the ex-Scientology community, it wants to be very monolithic and paint things with a single brush, and yet that's not everybody's experience. Um, I personally believe everybody in Scientology is in peril, and eventually, if they stay long enough, they will have a very bad outcome. But they're all going to have a different experience, and if you talk to them at certain points of it, you'll find that the experience actually wasn't all that bad. But that's not saying that Scientology is good, because it's not. Uh, YRB says, I did age appropriate labor at 6, but I was alongside my parents. Ask a farm kid what age they started doing labor. Yeah, that's kind of my point. I mean, some of what these kids were doing at the ranch was kind of like they were on a farm. I mean, and I don't want to whitewash it, because, I shot a film out there and we built an African village. And then I think I've told the story. They left the village after a few years. The rain had just crushed it, and they just left it there to rot. And then eventually they cleaned it up, and I was out there and I went, oh, they cleaned the village up. And the kids did that. And then I was like, the kids? I mean, it must have been infested with rattlesnakes and black widows, because any junk pile you left alone out of that property was going to be just a nest of black widows and rattlesnakes. So I was just really shocked. So there is that kind of stuff too. But when I hear these stories about the ranch, I think about farm kids, getting up at 6 a.m. and feeding the chickens and jumping on a tractor and helping their dad and blah, blah, blah. But they're with their parents. They're being seen. They know that they're loved. It's like, there's some, anyway, it's just, yeah. So philosophy says Eva Peron was given a lobotomy. Well, some people maybe deserve one. That I did not know that. So when she was singing "Don't Cry for Me, Argentina," she did sing that song, right? I mean, they didn't just make that up for the play. Yeah, so OGB Foster says lobotomies ended shortly after Don X was published. Yeah, I don't. Well, it was published in 1950, and they were going well into the 50s, so they might not have ended for this until the 60s. Because I know that the doctor lobotomy guy with the lobotomobile, he was operative. He was operating in the. Okay, let me just look this up. See what the hell it says. Was commonly performed in the mid 20th century. Was popular in the 30s. Okay, yeah, it says here in Canada they went from 48 to 52. So yeah, there was a slight overlap, I think, between Dianetics and lobotomies, and they stopped doing. I did, in all the pro Dianetics films that I did some really pretty intense recreations of people getting lobotomies. So. Hey, Hans Christian Schwartz is here. Hello from Germany. Love my German friends. Yeah, Rosemary Kennedy. Yeah, Eileen Bradley says Rosemary Kennedy famously got a lobotomy at age 23. When now it is thought she had just special needs, they turned her into a zombie for their convenience. That was pretty much what they did with lobotomies. There's another one. When I was doing all the research on psychiatry that I did to make that content that I was making, psychiatrists believed that a person having a convulsion, that the convulsion was therapeutic mentally. So a lot of these things like shock therapy were invented because they caused a convulsion. The one before they had shock therapy, what they did was they put a tube in your nose, like, just, this is going to be disgusting. So I'm just telling you, trigger alert. They'd put a tube down your nose, and then they'd put a funnel in the tube. They put the tube into your stomach. I forget the word for that, where you put something through the nose into the stomach. There's a medical term for that. And then they would pour insulin into the funnel and pour the insulin into your stomach, and you'd go into insulin shock, and that would cause a convulsion. But it was killing a lot of people. So then when shock therapy came along, it was like, well, let's just do that. So I tell you, I had nightmares, because I had, we had film of these patients in the 30s getting this insulin shock, and it was just so disgusting. This is interesting. Philosophy says here in New Zealand, our native birds are the oldest type that in other countries evolved into animals, but no predators here means they stay as birds. Yeah, well, it's not sure what to say about that. It's evolutionarily, that's a very interesting thing. But you could also make a case that having a predator will kind of push you into a new evolutionary. Oh, wow, we've hit 2 hours. We're going to have to bail on this pretty soon. This has been a great talk. Okay, so philosophy also provided us with this great piece of information. Last recorded lobotomy in the USA was 67. So there's the answer on that. So anyway, this is good. I think we have one thing there. Okay, good. So I'm going to need to bail now. I need to get back to packing my house. I read a short chapter of the book and then we ended up talking for 2 hours. I'm going to come back and do this thing on Freedom Magazine because it's really fascinating. And I think it's good for people to understand in terms of knowing a little bit more of the nuance of Scientology culture and how OSA works in relation to public relations. And before we go, let me just say one more time, help me support my journey to hold Scientology accountable. Buy me a coffee. There's the link. And then I've got a bunch of merch, including really beautiful copies of my book, which I'll sign, and you can buy one there. And anywhere in the United States, I can't ship them out of the country unless you want to pay, like, I don't know. I sent one to England. It was like $27. If you want to pay for it, that's fine. So thanks for subscribing. If you've subscribed, hit the notification bell. Give me a thumbs up if you like the content. I got more coming up. I'm going to be doing more outside, protesting, talking about shit nobody's ever leaned into. And then you can support this channel directly by, you can PayPal me at mitchbrisker@gmail.com. And I'm also trying to do some equipment upgrades, as I said earlier. So I have in my link tree, if you have there's an Amazon wish list. I've got some wireless microphones in there that are going to really help me do outside stuff to, in terms of protesting and doing stuff outside. And look who showed up right at the end. You're going to have to do the replay witness. Hey, nice to see you. Glad you showed up. Better late than never. And philosophy says, I got to put this up. Sorry. Philosophy says, oh, I love packing. You're invited. I know you're like a 26-hour flight away, but you want to come help me pack? I could use the help. And that's it. So listen, guys, thank you very much. I'm going to come back. I'm going to do this thing on freedom. In the meantime, let's go out with a little. Oh, and Thomas finally made it. Well, at least let me just mention your name and say hi. So at least we got that in. So I really appreciate it. You guys are terrific. I really appreciate the support. So let me just jump in here. Where is this? Oh, there it is. So we're going to go out with my lovely little dog who's asleep right behind me. And I'll see you guys soon. I'll come back in a couple of days and we'll do this freedom thing. We'll have a whole discussion about it. It'll be great. Keep on doing good work, and I'll talk to you soon.
If you fail to understand, then the same... Oh!